Today's story comes down to one word: forgettable. That's what a guy named Nate's fiancée called him. Calm, certain, almost kind about it, like she was finally doing him a favor by being honest. She told him people only showed up to events because of her, that without her pulling him along, he was basically invisible in any room. So Nate said, "Good to know," went to bed, and the next morning started the most unbothered little experiment you've ever seen. He stopped going places with her. No blowout, no speech, no drama. Just stopped showing up. And within 1 week, her entire social circle quietly let her know exactly how backwards she had it. That part's my favorite. My fiancé said, "People only invite you because of me. On your own, you're forgettable." I replied, "Good to know." That week, I stopped going anywhere with her. 3 days later, one of her closest friends pulled her aside. "I'm Nate, 29. About 3 months ago, I was still engaged to a woman I'll call Brooke. 2 years together, 6 months engaged at the time everything fell apart, and before you picture some big dramatic situation, it wasn't. No cheating, no nuclear fight that made the problem suddenly obvious. This was slower than that. A quiet drip of something I barely registered as a real issue until she finally said it out loud in a parking lot at 10 at night on a Friday. I'll be upfront. I'm not the easiest person to be social with. I'm reserved. I'd rather sit down with 3 people and have a real conversation than spend 2 hours doing the party circuit and go home knowing nobody's face. I know that can read as disengaged to someone who runs on social energy the way Brooke does. I get it. But there's a meaningful difference between this guy could open up more and what she eventually said to me in that car. That distinction is what this whole thing is about. I met Brooke when I was 27. She was the kind of person who made rooms feel louder just by walking into them. Magnetic, effortlessly comfortable with strangers, knew everyone's name within an hour of meeting them. She'd walk into a party and have 3 separate conversations going at once. I'd find one person and actually talk to them. We were social opposites, and for a solid stretch of time, most of the first year, honestly, that difference worked in our favor. She pulled me into situations I'd never have sought out on my own. I helped her slow down and breathe when the constant social activity got overwhelming. It felt like we genuinely balanced each other out. We got engaged after 18 months. Things seemed solid. I thought we were in a good place, and I want to be clear about this part because I think it matters. There were genuinely good stretches. Brooke at her best was someone I was really glad to be around. She made things feel worth doing, which sounds like a small thing, but it actually isn't. She'd suggest a random drive to somewhere neither of us had been, or find some event neither of us knew about, and make it an evening. She had energy in the way that some people just naturally have more of, and for a while that pulled me somewhere I wouldn't have pushed myself to go. I'm not trying to paint her as purely one thing, because she wasn't. The relationship had real good in it. I just didn't clock how slowly the weight was shifting until it was already sitting wrong. The cracks were showing up earlier than I admitted to myself. I just filed them under normal friction between 2 people with different styles, and moved on. Brooke had this habit, subtle enough at first to write off as teasing, of framing herself as the reason I had any social existence at all. The early comments were small. "Thank God I dragged you out tonight. You'd be home watching something alone. People wouldn't even know your name if I hadn't introduced you around." Coupley stuff. I rolled my eyes and moved on. But over the course of a year, the teasing shifted into something else. It became her actual explanation for why we got invited places, why people knew who I was, why I had any standing in our shared social world at all. I was, in her version of things, a project she'd generously taken on. The clearest early example I can point to: about a year in, we got invited to a birthday party for someone from her college friend group I'd met maybe twice. A full outdoor thing, 30, 40 people, a whole afternoon of it. I had a genuinely good time. I ended up in a corner of the patio with 2 guys talking about some hiking trail they'd done, stayed in that conversation for probably an hour, walked away knowing those 2 people a little better than I did walking in. Thought nothing of it. On the drive home, Brooke said, "You know people only include you in conversations because you're with me, right? They'd never know to talk to you otherwise." I told her that wasn't what happened at the party. She said she was just being realistic. I dropped it. That was the pattern. I'd have what felt like a normal interaction with a person. She'd reframe it as something she'd made possible. Over enough months, that kind of drip wears on you in ways you don't notice, until you actually stop and look at the watermark it left. About 4 months before everything went sideways, we were getting ready to go to one of her coworkers' birthday dinners. Nothing huge, a group of 12 or so at a place downtown. I was putting my shoes on, and she turned to me mid-earring and said, "Make more of an effort tonight. I don't want people thinking I dragged along dead weight." Dead weight? She said it the way you'd say something obvious, practical, like she was giving me useful information. I asked what she meant. She explained, "I stand in corners. I don't hold conversations long enough. People notice these things. She couldn't just not bring me because that looked worse. So try harder. Be engaging. Ask questions. Make people feel like you're actually there." So I did. I went around, asked about people's lives and families, remembered things from previous events and brought them up. I was doing everything you'd call making an effort, by any objective standard. But I watched her expression across the room all night, and whatever her bar was, I wasn't clearing it. That was the thing with Brooks' bar. It moved. After that night, every social event started to feel like a performance review I hadn't agreed to participate in. Every drive home was a debrief. You seemed distracted. You were too quiet in the second half. Why didn't you jump into that conversation? I remember one specific night, some dinner with her work friends, maybe 2 months before the breaking point, where she spent the whole drive home going through a list of moments I'd handled wrong. The way I'd answered a question too briefly, a conversation I'd walked away from too soon. At one point she said, "You just don't have a natural social instinct. Some people do, some people don't." Like she was explaining physics. I looked out the window and said something like, "Probably true," and let it end there. After a while, I just stopped arguing back. It felt like a loop that never went anywhere, so I'd nod, say, "You're right," or "I'll work on that," and drop it. In hindsight, that silence probably read as agreement with everything she was saying about me, which is its own problem. The actual breaking point came about 2 weeks before I ran my little experiment. We got invited to a dinner at Nina's, Nina being one of Brooke's closest friends, someone she'd known for years. 8 couples, nice restaurant, the kind of evening where everyone's casually competing to have had the most impressive few months. European vacations, corporate promotions, someone just closed on a second property, another person's kid got into some school everyone was supposed to be impressed by. I'm a project coordinator at a mid-sized consulting firm. My last few months were genuinely good. I finished a long project I'd been working on, picked up some new responsibilities, handled some stuff that I was actually proud of. But none of it turns into a dinner party story. It's just work. So I was quiet, asked questions when it felt right, listened more than I talked, stayed in the background. About an hour in, someone at the other end of the table told this long story about a trip they'd taken, some multi-country thing with complications and logistics, and a funny hotel situation. I asked a follow-up question about something in the middle of it that I was genuinely curious about. The person answered, "We went back and forth for a few minutes, and I honestly thought that was a normal human interaction." Across the table, Brooke had a look on her face that said otherwise. On the drive home, she started before we were even out of the parking garage. "That was hard to watch. You said maybe 10 words the whole night." I told her I didn't have a lot to add to conversations about trips I hadn't taken and promotions I hadn't received. She said that was always the problem. I never have anything to add. I just sit there and make her look bad. I asked her how me being quiet at a table of people I barely knew made her look bad in any measurable way. She pulled into our parking lot, stopped the car, and turned in her seat to face me. "People only invite you because of me. They don't actually want you there. They tolerate you because you're with me. On your own, you're forgettable." Forgettable! She said it completely calm, almost kind the way she framed it, like she'd been carrying this for a while, and was finally deciding to do me the favor of being honest instead of letting me keep walking around with a wrong picture of myself. "Good to know," I said. She followed me inside, still going. Social strategies, areas I needed to work on. She wasn't trying to be cruel. She was being realistic. If I ever wanted people to actually want to be around me, I needed to put in some real effort. I nodded along, went to bed. Lay there in the dark for a good hour with that word sitting in my chest. Forgettable. Okay, let's find out if that's actually true. Here's what I want to be clear about. I wasn't going into this wanting to hurt her or prove some point to her face. That wasn't the move. I didn't have some elaborate plan I was executing, no endgame I was steering toward. I just genuinely wanted to know if she was right. 2 years of hearing some version of "you're only relevant because of me" had done a quiet number on the way I carried myself in social situations. And I didn't even fully realize it until that Friday night when the word forgettable just landed in my chest and sat there like something solid. So yeah, I wanted to know if it was true. Simple as that. Hold on a second. Pause right there. For everyone listening, that's me jumping in. Your host, not Nate. I need a moment here because she said it how? Calm? Helpful? Like she was doing him a favor? Captain Main Character has been filing this assessment for months, clearly waiting for exactly the right parking lot at exactly the right time of night, and the verdict she lands on is forgettable. Not, I wish you'd open up more. Not, you can be hard to read sometimes. She went straight to forgettable, then followed him inside to hand out social improvement tips. The audacity on this woman could power a city grid. Anyway, watch what Nate does with this. I made the decision the next morning before I even got up. If people only invited me because of Brooke, I'd stop going to things with Brooke. Clean experiment. No drama, no big speech, no confrontation. Just quietly remove myself from the equation and see what the results looked like. That week she had 3 events lined up. Wednesday was a get-together with her work friends at a spot they all liked. Friday was dinner back at Nina's, which apparently happened regularly enough that it had its own recurring slot on the calendar. Saturday was brunch with her college roommates. The inner circle. The people she talked to basically every single day of her life. Events I would have walked into on autopilot 6 days ago. Not this time. Wednesday afternoon, she asked what time I'd be ready to leave. I'm not going tonight. She stopped. What? Why not? You said people only invite me because of you. So I'm testing that. You go, I'll stay home. She stared at me. Nate, I didn't mean you should stop coming to things. That's not... No, you were right, I said. If I'm forgettable and only there because of you, there's no real point in me going. People will probably have a better night without me taking up space. She called it ridiculous. I said maybe, but at least I was being forgettable at home where it wouldn't embarrass her. She grabbed her stuff and left around 7. I made some food, read for a while, went to bed without really tracking the time. She came in around 11, moved through the apartment quietly, and that was it. We both went to sleep without either of us bringing it up. Side note, I keep getting the order slightly off every time I tell this story. Wednesday was the work thing. Thursday was just a normal quiet evening at home. Friday was Nina's dinner. Doesn't change anything, just bugs me when I mix it up. Friday, same conversation with different details. You're not coming to Nina's? Nah, you said people just tolerate me because of you. I'd rather not be tolerated. She pushed back a little harder this time. People were going to ask questions. She was getting tired of this. She'd said what she said and didn't think I should be blowing it into something it wasn't. I told her I wasn't blowing anything up. I was taking her at her word. If my being there added nothing and people only put up with me because I came attached to her, my absence shouldn't register at all, right? That's literally what forgettable means. She went. I spent the evening alone in a way that was honestly kind of peaceful. Cooked something I'd been meaning to try. Watched part of a documentary I'd had queued for weeks. Sat on the couch without any background awareness of whether I was performing correctly for anyone. She came home after midnight, clearly more agitated than she'd been Wednesday. Nina had asked about me. Brooke told her I wasn't feeling well. When she walked in, I asked why she lied about it. She said she couldn't exactly explain to her friends that her fiancé was having a tantrum over something she said a week ago. I told her for the second time. This wasn't a tantrum. This was me taking her stated assessment of my social values seriously and responding logically to it. She didn't have a clean answer to that. Wait. Let me jump in here real quick. Still your host, not Nate. She called this a tantrum. She's the one who told her fiancé he was tolerated by their entire social circle, put forgettable in his chest like a splinter, and when he quietly tests her theory with zero yelling, zero drama, just stays home. That's the tantrum. Classic Captain Main Character energy. She started a fire, handed him the matches, and now she's confused about the smoke. And what I love is that Nate isn't angry. He's not emotional about this at all. He's just not there. That's the most unbothered move you can make. Saturday's about to hit different. Saturday morning, the stress was written all over her. The brunch was the big one. Her college roommates. The people she'd been closest to for a decade. The group that knew her better than almost anyone. Her actual inner circle. You're coming to brunch. Enough, Nate. This has gone on long enough. Nah. People are going to start asking questions about us. Tell them the truth. You said I'm forgettable and only at these things because of you. So we're giving everyone a chance to confirm that. I should not have said that. But you did. And now I'm curious whether it's actually true. She went quiet for a few seconds. I could see her trying to find the version of this argument she could win. There wasn't one, and I think she knew it, because pushing back required her to either admit the forgettable comment was wrong, which she wasn't ready to do, or defend it, which would just make the whole thing worse. She grabbed her keys and her bag and left without saying anything else. I spent the afternoon at home, read for a couple hours, caught up on a project report I'd been putting off, made lunch, took a long walk around the neighborhood. It was one of those walks where you don't have a destination. You just move and let your head sort through whatever it's sorting through. At one point, I realized I'd been gone almost 2 hours and hadn't once thought about how I was coming across to anybody. The quiet was genuinely nice. I hadn't noticed how much background noise I'd been carrying into every social situation until I had a Saturday completely free of it. She came home around 4. Door opened, footsteps through the front hall, and she walked straight past me to the bedroom without stopping or saying anything. I gave her about an hour, then went to check on her. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. Pale. Hey, what happened? Nothing. Brooke, you look like someone just read you results of a test you didn't know you were taking. What happened at brunch? She looked up at me, and I saw something I'd genuinely never seen on her face before. Not the performed vulnerability she'd occasionally put on in social situations to come across as relatable. This was real uncertainty. Like she'd walked into a room expecting the furniture in its usual places and found everything moved. Kat pulled me aside after brunch. Kat being her oldest friend, going back more than 10 years, basically a sister. Someone who'd known Brooke longer than I had, and probably knew things about her I never would. She asked why you hadn't been coming to things lately. I told her you were buried with work. She said that was fine, just checking in. Brooke stopped, swallowed. And then she said everyone's been asking about you, not asking why you're not there, asking about you. They miss you. I sat down. Kat said you're one of the only people at these things who actually listens when someone's talking. Like actually listens, not waiting for your turn, not already thinking about what you're going to say next, just actually present. She said you remember details people mentioned months ago and bring them back up later. She said you don't try to turn every conversation into a competition. Brooke's voice had gotten quiet, and then she asked if I'd said something to make you stop wanting to come around. Room got pretty quiet for a moment. What did you tell her? I lied, said it was work stress. She exhaled slowly. She didn't believe me. She said if I was making you feel like you didn't belong at these things, I was making a serious mistake. And then she explained why. Long pause. Apparently, people have been talking to each other for months about how I dominate conversations, how I redirect everything back to myself, how I visibly check out when someone else's story isn't impressive enough for me. And then, she stopped, looked down at her hands. They said they're glad when you're around because you balance me out, that when you're there, they actually enjoy themselves. How long has Kat known this? A while, she said. She just didn't know how to bring it up until now. Brooke's voice went somewhere smaller. She said she almost said something at Christmas. I let all of that sit there. So when you said people only invite me because of you, I was completely wrong, she said quietly. About all of it. They invite me because I'm your fiancé. You're the one they actually want there. I didn't say anything to that. There wasn't really a response. I went to the kitchen, got a glass of water, stood at the counter for a while. Not doing anything with it, just standing there. I kept coming back to one specific thing Kat apparently said. That people had been quietly talking about this for months, and never brought it up to Brooke directly. And what I couldn't fully shake was the realization that I'd been on the receiving end of a 2-year version of the same dynamic. She'd been telling me something consistently. I'd been absorbing it without real pushback, and it had settled into me in ways I didn't even fully recognize. The difference is she'd been saying it about herself, positioning herself above me, and her friends had been quietly watching her do it and not saying anything. Nobody said anything until I stopped showing up and gave them a specific reason to. That's the detail that stayed with me longest. Pause. Just pause. For anyone who needs it spelled out, this woman spent 2 years telling her fiancé he was forgettable. Built her whole self-image around being his social gateway, the reason he existed in any room worth being in. Walked into that brunch expecting the usual. Friends, good time, herself at the center of it. And her own people quietly let her know the room's actually more alive when he's there. I've seen ego trips end in a lot of ways. I've never seen one get canceled by a college friend over Saturday brunch. The floor just dropped out from under Captain Main Character. And Nate literally just stayed home. The next few days were tense in that specific way where two people are carrying the same heavy information and neither one knows how to pick it up. Brooke tried to act normal. She wasn't pulling it off. Wednesday, she went to the work thing alone. Came back 2 hours later looking genuinely deflated, sat down at the kitchen table, and told me Diane had asked about me. Diane being one of her work friends I'd apparently been having some running back and forth with for months about a fantasy novel series. She had a recommendation she'd been holding on to for the next time I was around. I sat there actually trying to remember a sustained conversation with Diane, and couldn't land on anything I'd think of as significant. I thought I was just being friendly at those events, asking questions, showing interest, that normal stuff. Brooke looked at me for a second, then said something I've thought about a lot since. That's the whole thing. You don't realize when you're connecting with people. You think you're just being polite. But people feel like you're actually present with them. I never noticed it because I was always too focused on making sure the room was paying attention to me. That landed. Thursday was just quiet. We moved around each other without much to say. I worked later than usual. We made dinner together without really talking through it. Watched something neither of us paid attention to, went to bed. That specific kind of post-revelation quiet where you're both processing and neither of you is ready to start the next conversation yet. Friday morning, I woke up to a text on my phone from Nina. Not from Brooke, directly from Nina herself. She said she knew I'd been buried in work stuff lately, but they were doing a small dinner the following week, and she'd really love it if I could make it. No pressure at all, she said, but she mentioned I was missed and wanted me to know the invite was specifically for me. I showed it to Brooke over coffee. She picked up the phone, read it once, then read it again. Set it back down on the table. Said, "You should go, without me." I asked what she meant by that. She sat back in her chair, and something in her posture just lowered, like she'd been holding something up and let it go. "I think it means I've spent 2 years telling you that you're only interesting because of me, when the real truth is, I'm only tolerable because of you." That was the most honest she'd been since the parking lot. Later that same afternoon, Kat sent Brooke a longer message. Brooke got it, sat with it for a while, then came and found me in the living room and handed me her phone without saying anything. The message was the kind of blunt that you can only write to someone you've loved long enough to stop padding things. Kat laid it out fully. How Brooke talked over people at these events. How she'd steer conversations back to herself within a couple of sentences. How she'd visibly go flat when someone else's story didn't hit some unspoken threshold she had in her head. It wasn't mean. It was just very, very specific. The kind of specific that only comes from watching someone closely for a long time. And then the line that hit hardest? The only time you're actually bearable at these things is when Nate's around. He softens you, makes you actually listen. When he's not there, you're exhausting. Brooke stood there while I read it. I read it twice. Handed the phone back. "That's harsh," I said. "It's honest." She looked at the phone for a moment, then set it face down on the coffee table. "And I've been doing the same thing to you, telling you you're forgettable. When really, I think I was scared that people might like you more than me." I sat there for a second. "How long have you thought that?" She didn't answer right away. "I don't know. A while." I told her I needed some time to think. She nodded. I sat on the couch for a while without doing much of anything useful. "Hold on, also let me lay this out clearly." Nina texted Nate directly. Not Brooke. Nate. And Kat, basically a sister, someone who's loved Brooke for over a decade, sent a message calling her exhausting without him. That's not one person having a rough day. That's a pattern with receipts attached. But here's the detail that actually gets me. Brooke admitted she was terrified people might like him more than her. She knew. On some level, she's always known. Forgettable wasn't an honest read of who he is. It was a preemptive strike. Convince him he needs you before he figures out he doesn't. And now here they both are, sitting with that. Final chapter. Final update. We didn't end things right away. We tried for about 3 months. Brooke did some real self-examination during that stretch. Reading, journaling, actually sitting with the patterns she'd built, and trying to understand where they came from and why she'd needed them. To her credit, she wasn't defensive about it once the initial shock settled. She'd come home from one of those social events and give me a straightforward rundown of how she'd done, where she'd caught herself redirecting, where she'd actually managed to stay in someone else's story without steering it. I don't want to be dismissive of that effort because it was real. I started being clearer about what I'd accept from her, both in private and especially in front of people. Clearer lines, more direct conversations. We had some of the most honest exchanges of our entire relationship in those 3 months, which is its own kind of sad. It took her own social circle essentially issuing a report card for us to actually talk straight to each other. But 3 months later, we both knew the math wasn't going to hold. She'd spent 2 years slowly wearing away the way I saw myself in social situations, telling me I was tolerated, invisible, only valuable because of her proximity. And even with genuine effort and real behavioral change on her end, I couldn't get forgettable out of the walls. The word just lived there. And for her part, she couldn't fully move past the fact that her social circle preferred me without her there. Not with bitterness, at least not openly. Just with this specific quiet sadness that didn't have anywhere useful to go, and that kept resurfacing at moments you can't plan around. We called off the engagement in March, as quietly as we could manage. About as clean as two people can make it when the foundation turns out to be one person's insecurity sitting directly on top of the other person's slowly eroded sense of worth. Here's the ironic part, and looking back, it's almost funny. After we called it, the invites kept coming. Nina's dinners, Diane's book thing. I went, as it turned out, and it was clear pretty quickly that she and I had genuinely built a real ongoing conversation over 2 years of these events. One she cared about enough to have a specific recommendation saved for me. We spent about 40 minutes talking through it at the first dinner I went to after the split, and I walked out of there thinking, this is what I've apparently been doing this whole time without realizing it. Game nights with people who started as Brooke's co-workers, and somewhere along the way became people I actually knew. A couple of hiking things with the guys from that birthday party, where Brooke had told me nobody would have talked to me without her engineering it. They texted me directly, asked if I was still doing trail stuff. I was. We went twice. They weren't inviting me out of awkward loyalty to Brooke or some obligation they felt stuck with. They were inviting me despite her absence, not around it. One of them mentioned, completely unprompted, no context, that the vibe at these things felt more relaxed now. I didn't know what to do with that information. Just nodded, filed it somewhere quiet. Brooke moved to a different city about 6 months after we ended things. New place, new scene, fresh start. We texted a few times in the first couple months after the split. Nothing heavy, just practical stuff about shared things we needed to sort out. The last real conversation we had, she said she'd been doing a lot of thinking about the kind of person she wanted to be in rooms full of people. I told her I thought that was a good thing to be thinking about. I meant that. I genuinely hope she found the version of herself she was always trying to project. The magnetic, interesting, charismatic one, without needing someone quieter standing next to her to make it feel real. That's not sarcasm. I actually mean it. As for me, I'm doing well. Better than I expected if I'm being real about it. Turns out forgettable was never the accurate word. I'm not the loudest person in any room. I'm not working the crowd or performing for anyone or trying to have the best story at the table. But I make people feel like what they're saying is worth hearing. And apparently that's something people actually remember, even when you're not tracking it yourself. That's not forgettable. That's just a quieter, different way of being there. And apparently it's the kind people actually notice. So, tell me what you think. If someone spent 2 years quietly convincing you that you only mattered because of them, would you have run the same experiment Nate did? Quiet, no drama, just removed yourself? Or would you have blown it all up on night 1? Drop it in the comments. Look, I'll be straight. Nate didn't go scorched earth here. No confrontation, no speech, no dramatic move. He stopped showing up and let the truth do the heavy lifting. And sometimes that's actually the colder play. Captain main character spent 2 years convincing this guy he was background noise. And all it took was 3 events without him. for her own people to quietly tell her she had it completely backwards. If you've ever been called forgettable by someone who needed your presence to make their table worth sitting at, you know exactly how this one landed. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, fix that now.